Alright, response video to a couple of Pyrrho videos on this idea of logic, which we've been over before. I had a series of videos in the past where we talked about, debated logic and consciousness, sort of. But anyway, never completed, of course, because he bailed out. Anyway, so now he's on an airplane, pussy. So yeah, he's running away from the argument again. But anyway, let's just try to deal with this. So anyway, so he made a video with this logic only zone guy, and just you know, the Pyrrho's conversation is just this yammery yammery kind of mythology, methodology, whatever, doesn't matter, procedure, acting, but the way he reads his script. It's all this, you know, how to say this. Oh, that's bad, but oh yeah, it's not only bad. It's not always bad. No, it's a little bit okay. Yeah, it's kind of like this, and it's a little bit like that, and it has some of those, and it has some of them, and it has some of this, and some of. I mean, it's all this hemming. You know, nothing, no direct statements ever, nothing explicit. Just all this wishy-washy, blow smoke bullshit, and that's what I see a lot of it as, just blowing smoke. The pretense of conversation, not the actual pretense of argument even, not any effort to resolve anything, because he's not a believer in a resolution, not a believer in a truth. So anyway, he was, you know, so anyway, in this, the second video he made here, where he's paraphrasing the logic only guy because he's eventually insulted him, and so now he had to make a petty response video. And at one point he did say something like, well, you didn't even point out the fallacies of Anacondavat or something. And yeah, he did. He directly pointed them out. He says the guy is saying that logic leads to tyranny. Well, what's the evidence of this? Where has logic taken us down any wrong roads? And so Pyrrho sort of abused this also by claiming that somehow the Nazis were impeccably logical. You know, that somehow it's impeccable logic. For someone not to realize that murdering Jews is sort of a significant negative consequence. Like that would sort of be like leaking oil a little bit, that you have to annihilate another genetic class of humans. I mean, obviously you could just say, look, the easy logical challenge to the premise that it's okay to exterminate Jews would just simply be to say, well, what if it was all you? I mean, what if it was you? And this was going to be your solution, your final solution, was to take some segment of you. Like say we make 10 clones of you, and you're going to take 20% of your clones and horribly dump all the burden on them, all the work, all the nasty bits. You could logically understand, oh yeah, I get it, that would be like just like me suffering and doing all, oh yeah, that would be an excessive burden for a minority. That's why that would logically be unacceptable. So you'd have part of your, this would be what you would learn through the logical process, is that one of the standards of a sufficient solution is that you don't have catastrophic effects for a minority, right? So we understand that nuclear power plants are dangerous and potentially unviable merely because the fact, not that they'll kill everybody, but yes, that they will do dramatic and catastrophic harm to a certain limited number of people who live near them. You know, and they're going to pay a very high price for it. And we can understand that price is too high. So again, it's not logic that fails, it's the premises that fail, and the premises are supposed to be challenged through the process of logic. So anyway, in his video he just keeps talking about what logic is. I will explain what logic is in the end of this video, because these people don't understand what logic is. They don't understand that the rules of logic are just simple rules for how you play a game. And that's all it is. And logic is the game. And there are things, as you're playing the game, they're called violations. They're cheats. And once they've been identified as a cheat, we put them in the category of a fallacy. We say, well, that's a fallacy. I'm not going to kill you for it, but you can't do that. So whatever goal you scored with that fallacy, well, that gets written off because you cheated. And logically, the game is always played by honorable players, supposedly, as a premise. And honorable players will admit that, yes, there's no scoring on an invalid premise and an invalid argument. So, yeah, no score. So I just did explain what logic is, but I'll explain it again. And then again and again and again. But anyway, I'll play this part first, but Pyrrho's just so damn irritating.
We're going for the evidence. It's a classic skeptical argument of ancient skepticism.
What I'm saying is like, in terms of what I can tell people, if I'm going to tell people things, I need to be able to prove it without any argument. I need to be able to show it and have it be real.
Yeah, well, you have to make arguments, so that doesn't really make sense. So I don't know what he was saying there, but anyway,
what if that's never possible?
I'm waiting for the better answer.
Quite possible.
But it is though.
But look at F equals ma. You're going to ever invent one better than Isaac Newton? F equals ma, and then he proved it.
Okay, so he's just saying that F equals ma, which is just force equals frequency times acceleration. So how fast it's moving, how much it's vibrating.
To everybody,
what it really comes down to is how many photons are there. That's frequency, and then acceleration is always the same for photons.
Possible, and everybody thought it was the way things worked for 150 years or whatever, and then, oh, sorry, it was just an approximation. We have general relativity. It's not quite the whole story.
It's not quite the whole story. So now wait till the next thing he says. So this is how he's using words, and he's going to claim it has something to do with logic, right? So all physics teachers are still teaching F equals ma. That hasn't changed any. It doesn't change much at all, except when you get in extraordinarily bizarre circumstances that are never really seen in any of the common universe. That's why there's a catch.
Grain of truth in it.
A grain of truth. Did you hear what he just said? He just said there's a grain of truth in it. I mean, it's substantially the truth. It's like saying there's a grain of truth in evolution. Because somebody came up with the idea of punctuated equilibrium, or the idea that most evolution takes place in isolated locations in small populations. So just because somebody has a little augmentation to Darwin's general theory of relativity, of evolution, that somehow it's a grain of truth. So that would be considered a fallacy or a fallacious piece of argumentation, to sit there and imply that F equals ma is somehow a grain when it's the substance of the beach and all you're doing is sprinkling some more sand on it.
So it seems to me, with that standard, if you can make an argument that has a grain of truth, the signal to noise makes it
a grain of truth. Again, this is just the backward way to describe the circumstance, so that's really not the catch. You don't throw out a basic idea just because you find one tiny little instance where it isn't quite right. Like the two-slit experiment, for example, in physics, right? All of physics basically says that photons are energy, not waves, that they're particles, that they always, always, always terminate as a complete packet of energy, always. And, and so you have one or two little circumstances where it looks a little bit funky, and all of a sudden you just blow up the beach. To save your little grain of truth, to walk around with it going, ooh, isn't it pretty, isn't it shiny, isn't it sparkly? And this is the whole problem with this Pyrrho philosophy bullshit, is he is pretending he didn't hear the word evolution, he's pretending he didn't hear the word you're related to, like, bugs, he's pretending he doesn't understand conceptually what's happening inside human brains, which is absolute shit, okay? We're just lizards, and we're just mechanically reacting to the world as we've been programmed, and instead of just accepting that gigantically evidence-based conclusion, he wants to jump on some sort of... I heard somebody saw a purple unicorn, okay, yeah, down the street, and they almost got their monkey to chisel a picture of it on a rock, but yeah, the monkey ran out of rocks. Some catch again, always, and so it's just... and so that's what he's defending, though. That's his rationalization, because he's not dealing in reality or the truth. And if you don't want to know the truth, you cannot say you love logic, because logic is how you acquire understanding of the truth.
Valuable. You can't always get rid of the noise. There's always going to be this, what's the next improvement? You can always...
Oh, yeah, well, that's just more nonsense. You're not going to improve on 2 + 2 = 4. You're just not. There's all kinds of equations that are rock solid that you're not going to change. So this is, again, another fallacious argument. right? Where he is relying on some presumption that there's always improvement, there's always more information, and there's always more blah blah, there's always more significant, and it always changes everything, and the whole world always changes. No, it doesn't. And, the last big piece of news was Darwin. And that was a piece of news that a ton of scientists already knew. They already believed in evolution. They just didn't have proof of it, or a compiled list of the evidence. And that's really all Darwin did. His grandfather was an evolutionist, ironically, before there was even evidence. I mean, before there was Darwin, before there was the origin of species as a documentation of evolution. He already believed it, because there was already, you could see the evidence of it in the real world. You could just walk outside and see it for yourself. You could see the domesticated vegetables you were planting in your garden.
But that doesn't justify anything. It just means that logic, okay.
Okay, well, this gets boring. So anyway, I guess I'll just finish up, keep this one short, by just explaining, give you a metaphor for the game of logic. So the game of logic is basically you're trying to score this goal, which is accurate definition or description of a solution or of a truth. So that's your goal. Your goal is the best solution to a problem, or you're just trying to find out how it works, and that's the goal, is the definition of function. So your players in this game. Now the rule is that you can't, the first rule, biggest rule in the book, you can't connect two contrary statements. So you can't at one point say it's white and then 3 statements later say no, it's completely black. So you can't contradict in your chain of reasoning. But and that's about it to me. This is the only real rule beyond the rule number 2, which is, yes, you can accept something as a valid statement if there is no other reasonable statement. If no other statement comes even close to having the truth value, then you accept it as that's okay. We can accept that that's the way it is. And we can move forward. We can build on that next. We can place that card on the house of cards, so to speak, if you want to think of it as a shakier metaphor. But yes, it becomes a valid premise when there's no competing theory. Nothing. And I would argue that most of these conversations, there's no rational competing theory. There's no rational competing theory to evolution. There just isn't. It's the only reasonable theory. The only reasonable description of the reality. So any statement saying that that's our origin is going to be unassailable. And now you can logically, there's a ton of stuff you can get to logically once you've accepted evolution as the creator of our form and function. Its implications are huge. Alright, so what logic is, I wrote down 3 words because I like the way they fit. But there's objective, there's your objective, and then there's your methods. And in between objective and methods, there's consequences. So, when these people say catch-22, when they play their game, that, well, logic, you could use logic to justify killing the Jews. But you really couldn't, unless you can get past the consequential argument that would say, exterminating people brutally is too high a price to pay for accomplishing your goal. So if accomplishing your goal was, you could give a whole bunch of descriptions of circumstances that would be unacceptable, like, potentially causing catastrophic damage to the environment or some other thing where you just say, well, if it's got the potential to do that, we really can't risk that. That's too catastrophic a failure. So you could make a logical, rational argument defeating or making sure that part of the premise of the solution doesn't mean solution for us and failure for them. That would be part of the argument, is that it's not a solution to a problem if what you do to solve the problem is violate essentially the minimum standards of a solution. You wouldn't accept a solution that said you're going to get killed or you're going to be thrown in a concentration camp. So there would be no expectation that the right solution would include something you wouldn't accept as a solution. That a solution for somebody else is going to be a solution that you wouldn't accept. That would be one of those fallacy things. Well, that would be evidence of a fallacious argument if you wouldn't endure the consequences of your own argument, your own solution. So I didn't say that as brilliantly as I thought I would, but that's the way it works sometimes. But really, logic is just this simple rule. You can't contradict yourself, and if there's a competing theory that's reasonable, you got more work to do. But if there's no competing reasonable theory, then you just point where the evidence goes. Period. You ask a question, you provide an answer, you say, is there evidence? And that's it. If there's evidence and there's no competing theory, you move to the next question. That's logic. And it won't ever fail if you do it sensibly. If you do it in an environment where people ask questions like, wait a minute, is it really okay to kill all the Jews? If somebody asks the question, well then, you are dependent on somebody being able to figure out it's not a good idea. It's not an acceptable consequence. But there's nothing intrinsically or fundamentally tyrannical about logic except the fact that logic has a lot of integrity. And if you find a solution and it passed all logical muster in that you don't have any reasonable counter theory to any of the premises built in the logic, yes, then logic will be tyrannical in that it is describing a truth, the best solution. And the best solution can't be, by definition, less than the best solution. It can't. So unless you can demonstrate with evidence that it's less than the best solution, you don't have an argument. And if you didn't raise the contention somewhere in the process of the logic, somewhere in the premises, somewhere in the statements, then you don't have nothing to complain about. But really, compared to what? Compared to what? Intuition, which is basically just bigotry. So these idiots, sorry, but that's what these people are, Pyrrho and Anticonovat and whatever the other doofy turd is, and even Hothloday to some extent, who think our intuition has some sort of integrity. It has absolutely none. It's a fucking monkey. Okay, your first response is a monkey's response. It's an idiot's response. The only response that really matters is the thoughtful one that takes a little time to work in the brain and make sure there is no consequences. It needs time to see the consequences. So if you're going to be, if I'm going to be put on trial by something, I much rather be put on trial by logic than be put on trial by people's intuition or their sense of anything. Okay, fuck that. I think you'd want it that way too. I think you'd want somebody to have to make a logical argument that you get the challenge, rather than some argument from my subjective feelings. Yeah, I think so. I think you'd know it. So anyway, yeah, so there's a shorter video. Alright, till next time. But yeah, you can't really describe logic. Logic is playing the game. All you can really do is describe what's not logic. And fallacious arguments like, most people think, or some kind of crap like that, that's not logic. So statements in defense of something that are statements that rely on nonsense, undemonstrated nonsense, aren't logical statements, and they can't be used as evidence. So it's basically just a trial. That's what logic is. And what we're describing are just the rules of evidence. That some things are evidence and some things are not evidence. And it's just understanding what is or is not evidence. It's pretty good. But the evidence does all the pointing. The evidence drags you, it just pushes you right in the direction called logical conclusion. You can't help but go there. As soon as you describe the statement of truth, evolution happened and is the source of our existence, as soon as you say it, it just points to all kinds of things. All by itself. Anyway, till next time.